On a continent of untold riches, theirs was an empire as complex as Egypt and as mighty as Rome. Within 50 years, 5 million Incas were dead, and an empire was no more. Did they die for a secret history hidden among the stars? Secrets of the Incas starts Monday at 8 on 4.
Our trouble with food season comes to an end in half an hour with a personal insight into what it was like to have an eating disorder back in the 1940s and 50s. 3 Thin Ladies is at 8 o'clock after Channel 4 News.
Scrambling for their lives, time is running out for the flood victims in Mozambique. Just 5 helicopters for hundreds of square miles and thousands of people threatened as the waters continue to rise. Good evening. The UN in Mozambique says we need help and we need it now. More helicopters, more aircraft, or we shall lose many, many lives. John Prescott says he will meet Ken Livingstone face to face to try and keep him in the Labour Party, but he tells this programme, "I'm not offering any deals." Leicester City beat Tranmere to take the Worthington Cup for the second time in 4 years at Wembley. And just what is it about Scotland? How come the Clause 28 debate north of the border has been so bitter, so divisive? Well, I quote, "The situation is incredibly desperate right now." Those are the words of a UNICEF official in Mozambique. There are thousands stranded on rooftops and in trees, with just 5 overworked helicopters to pluck them to safety. The race between the rising waters and the rescuers is in danger of being lost. Yet more torrential rain is now forecast. The worst affected areas are Save River Valley, where up to 10,000 people are stranded. Today's relief effort has focused on the Shockway area, where floodwaters of the Limpopo rose dramatically overnight. Here's Peter Morgan.
The people of Shockway are running short of time. Their town has disappeared under nearly 20 feet of floodwater. Thousands are now trying to escape before the last pieces of dry land disappear. 5 South African helicopter teams work around the clock. So far, they've rescued more than 3,000 people, including some sheltering in trees. Corrugated iron roofs have become emergency life rafts. Heavy rains in neighbouring Zimbabwe and South Africa have turned the Limpopo River Valley into a disaster area, flooding thousands of farms. The floodwaters are still rising.
The situation is incredibly desperate right now. There are thousands of people out there who really need to be rescued. And the helicopters you see behind here are totally overwhelmed. There is no way we are going to be able to save all the people out there whose lives are at risk. And this, quite frankly, is catastrophic.
Mozambique says it needs at least 5 more helicopters to speed up the rescue operation. They're being used to deliver food and medicine, as well as to move people to higher ground. But the helicopters may be needed closer to home. South Africa's facing floods in its northern provinces, where 75 people have died in the last 3 weeks. A British donation of £700,000 will keep the 5 helicopters in Mozambique for another fortnight. Aid workers want other governments to do the same.
There is a need for more water purification units. There is a need for expansion of the health and medical supplies that are here. But it is no use having more supplies come in if we don't have the means to transport those to the people in most need.
As thousands flee this drowned world, aid agencies are calling for extra boats and barges to reach the worst affected areas. Emergency supplies will also be needed in the capital, Maputo. British officials say it'll take too long for RAF helicopters to get to the region.
This is an emergency. The problem is that to get a helicopter from the UK will take too long. What we're looking is in all the countries in the region. We've provided the money, and what we need now is just to be able to find helicopters which can do it, as well as the people who are experienced enough to manage airlifting operations.
The greatest danger for now is exposure. Thousands have been stranded for several days, enduring torrential rain and in some cases cyclones. Aid workers predict this natural emergency will get worse as a fresh wave of floodwater enters Mozambique from Zimbabwe.
Peter Morgan reporting. Now, Labour has achieved more than anyone could have imagined, so said Tony Blair today as he led the party's 100th anniversary celebrations. He told activists that Labour could only succeed with a broad coalition of support from all walks of life. But the celebrations were overshadowed by more immediate concerns. Next week, the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott is due to meet Ken Livingstone to convince him not to run as an independent candidate for London Mayor. Here's Oliver King.
Tony Blair arrived at London's Old Vic, keen to ignore the party's recent troubles.
I joined the Labour Party nigh on 20 years ago, when all around here was green fields.
While this audience was warmed up like the rural variety, the Prime Minister told them that the forces of conservatism were threatening the progress his government had made for Labour's core voters. And those forces, he said, partly existed within his own party. Tony Blair set Labour new goals, including the holy grail of full employment. But with an absent Ken Livingstone overshadowing the celebrations, he stressed the party should learn the lessons of its 100-year history.
When we take power, no matter what we do, our right-wing opponents attack us for failing the country. Of course they do, they think it's their job. But it is the fate of progressive parties, however, that parts of their own side join in. Every Labour government has faced the same, from the revolt against the 1924 government on unemployment benefit to the winter of discontent in the 70s. But 100 years on, we are older and wiser.
Now, I want each one of you on today, our birthday, to turn round and shake hands with the person behind you and wish them happy birthday.
With party unity in mind, the Deputy Leader John Prescott gave his now traditional rousing speech. He's expected to meet Ken Livingstone next week, maybe as early as tomorrow. Elsewhere, he denied he'd offer Livingstone any deal on the London Underground to keep him inside the party. Livingstone has made opposition to the government's plan to part privatise the Tube key to his campaign for London Mayor. He wants London to borrow money by issuing bonds, but experts say there's no sign of the government changing its mind.
It's all about control, about whether central government makes decisions or it's devolved to local authorities. Current policy is that London is going to be treated like any other local authority, and local authorities are not able to make their own decisions about capital programmes. And I think the government's worried that if they concede the ability to London to raise capital through bonds, that will create a precedent for local authorities up and down the country.
Frank Dobson, who remains Labour's candidate for mayor, has called for a review into the financing of the Tube. He didn't want to talk about it today. Do you think there's a deal?
No, you didn't. No, you didn't.
Party members with memories of the internal strife that dogged the 1980s want one of that decade's key figures to back Dobson.
I would simply say to Ken, remember your whole connection with the Labour Party. Remember that if you're going to really be able to do anything worthwhile, you'll have to do it with the Labour Party.
Livingstone, though, knows an independent campaign could produce more personal attacks on his private life, like those seen in today's Mail on Sunday. And he'll tell the BBC's Panorama tomorrow that the pressure of this decision is immense. But for Tony Blair, Labour's somewhat troubled history has taught him a valuable lesson.
But remember, there's only one thing the public dislikes more than a leader in control of his party, and that is a leader not in control of his party.
And despite the fact that a majority of London members voted for Ken Livingstone, this audience at least was keen to agree.
Well, now, earlier I spoke to the Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott and asked him whose idea it was to meet Ken Livingstone.
Well, I'm the deputy leader of the party, of course, and concerned with party matters, elected by the party. And Margaret, our General Secretary, said, would I be prepared to meet Ken if necessary? And of course I would.
What's on offer?
About that. Well, it's something to talk about the party itself. The party has now elected its candidate. It's Frank Dobson. Ken seems to be hanging about as to whether he feels he can adopt in that situation. I hope we can convince him, because Ken has always been a party man. He always says he was born in the Labour Party, he'd die in the Labour Party. And we have to say to Ken, like everybody else is at the moment, let's get behind our newly elected candidate.
OK, but let's clarify this. If he does decide to stand, what do the Labour Party rules say will happen in that situation?
Well, nothing until he actually stands against a candidate. You can make all sorts of declarations.
When or if he does, what happens then?
Well, that happens to everybody. In fact, in those circumstances, whether it's a council election, parliamentary or Lord Mayor, they will face expulsion if they fight the officially nominated Labour candidate.
Because, you see, it looks like the Labour Party is very worried. The Deputy Prime Minister is going to see
Deputy Leader,
about him.
Deputy Leader, that is a party position. Nothing to talk about underground, all to do about party.
Nonetheless, you, John Prescott, in person, are going to see him. It makes it look like the Labour Party is extremely worried about
No, it isn't. If you look at my background, I'm often sent on these kind of missions. You remember there was the one in the by-election where I had to go and ask the Labour candidate to stand down.
When you go into this meeting, will you be taking any offer? You see, if
No.
I was Ken Livingstone, I'd be thinking,
not.
I want a bit of carrot. I've had an awful lot of stick, and I want perhaps a bit of carrot, something to
I don't know what you mean.
me.
I've taken part in these elections. You get beat. I got beat. And when you get beat, you actually accept the nominated and elected candidate. In this case, it's Frank Dobson. But I don't know what Ken's mind is at the moment. I hope he'll stay in the Labour Party.
So let's get this clear. You will be taking no offer at all to Ken Livingstone tomorrow?
None at all.
You're there to listen, if you like.
Not there to talk. I mean, I never know to shut up. If Ken says something to me, I will respond to him.
Because, you see, the problem is, from his position, he is actually facing a choice, isn't he? It's either obscurity on the backbenches, if he goes along with what you want, i.e. to not stand and stay in the party, or it's the possibility of glory, standing for London Mayor. That's not much of a persuasion, is it?
Well, Ken's always been on the back benches. I'm not so sure it's obscurity. He's certainly well to the fore. But we've had an election. We've elected a candidate. The party has spoken. And it's each for every one of us to get behind the party candidate.
And rightly
who
or
in
wrongly,
this case is Frank Dobson.
Rightly or wrongly, that process is seen by an awful lot of voters as tainted. That is tempting Ken
Well, I'm
Livingstone
sorry, I'm
to
not
stand.
just accepting that. I mean, Ken used that word, tainted, but Ken was the one that campaigned for this electoral college. And we have what we have. And as Bill Morris has said, if people want to talk about changing it, then there's procedures inside the party to do that. But at the moment, it is the same procedure and election formula that elected Tony Blair and myself. And I'm sure Ken shouldn't think he's above that.
So you will be saying, stay within the party, Ken, stay on the backbenches, keep the party together, and you believe that will be enough to persuade him?
I don't know. That's up to Ken. But you wouldn't expect me to do anything else as the deputy leader to actually remind any member in the party that we have an election procedure and it's elected a candidate. We have a manifesto. It's decided by our party. No one individual can be above that.
I'd expect you to perhaps to make an offer. I mean, New Labour
Why? Why should I?
Because New Labour is very good at co-opting people in this situation. You've got plenty of former Tory cabinet ministers who've been used and become part of the New Labour programme. Chris Patten, to name but one. Isn't there a possibility?
I don't see the relevance of that. This is a Labour Party member.
The relevance is that there is a possibility that New Labour could offer something which may persuade Ken Livingstone not to stand.
I'm not going in bearing gifts. I'm going in talking about the Labour parties to which the two of us have been very much involved all our lives. Ken has been involved with the Labour Party, so have I, and we just talk about the future of himself in regard to the Labour Party. I only read what I see in the press. He's not making many statements. Here's a chance to have a talk to a colleague.
John Prescott speaking to me earlier. Meanwhile, Tony Blair has today admitted that the genetically modified foods could damage human health. In an article in The Independent on Sunday, he says that the environmental campaigners who have attacked the government's commitment to the biotechnology industry may have a point. All this comes after almost 2 years of battling consistently in favour of further GM research.
A year ago, Tony Blair was one of the staunchest defenders of research into genetically modified foods. According to his futuristic vision, then, New Labour walked hand in hand with new technology. He wrote, "I am no scientist, but those who are make what seems to me a compelling case that biotech will be the revolutionary science of the 21st century." He concluded, "There is no scientific evidence on which to base a ban on GM foods and crops." Since then, Labour's commitment to biotechnology has suffered one setback after another. A series of supermarkets have withdrawn GM foods from their shelves altogether, as the government's message has been drowned out by consumer protests. Today's article looks like a turning point in Tony Blair's thinking. He now admits
There is no doubt that there is potential for harm, both in terms of human safety and in the diversity of our environment, from GM foods and crops.
This is genuinely a new stance which represents a completely different approach. There's a new tone, it's much more cautious, it's much more recognising the strength of the arguments from the critics of the government's policies.
The government's denying that there is any change of policy. It's simply an acknowledgement of legitimate public concern. So how will we know if today's rhetoric conceals a genuine change of policy? Well, pressure groups are pointing to several key decisions. The imminent decision on whether to licence the first GM maize seeds, due next month. A ruling that would convert the present voluntary moratorium on commercial planting into a legally binding one. And an acceptance that farm-scale trials of biotech crops become invalid if the government cannot find enough farmers to take part. This week's international conference on biotechnology, which opens tomorrow in Edinburgh, will indicate whether the government is serious about converting its new attitude into genuine policy. And our science correspondent, Andrew Veach, is in Edinburgh for that conference, and he joins us now. Andrew, certainly a change of language, I don't think there'd be any doubt about that, but does that signal any real change of policy on the horizon?
Well, the policy is apparently not for and not against. I'm not quite sure if you can describe that as a policy, so I'm not sure if it's changed. I think what has happened is that there's been a sea change, certainly, in the Prime Minister's attitude. I think what he genuinely wants now is an open debate. He wants the facts on the table, and that starts here tomorrow. 400 delegates, 14 countries, and it's going to be opened by Molam, the minister in charge of all things genetic, and she tells us she's going to be issuing a challenge to the people here, and I quote, to find common ground, to look at the evidence, to listen to one another and to work towards a consensus. Now, on that last point, she's not going to get one. She's not going to get a consensus here. I was talking some time ago, a few hours ago, to Sir John Krebs, the head of the Food Standards Agency. He's going to be chairing the conference, and he says, frankly, he does not expect a consensus. What he does want to do, or what he does hope to get, is to define the areas of agreement and disagreement.
People have been carrying out their own discussion in different rooms, talking past each other. What we're trying to do here in Edinburgh is to bring the different groups together, the NGOs, the scientists, the regulators, and people from different parts of the world. So we're trying to have the debate in the chamber where people discuss with each other rather than talking past each other as they've done in the past.
Well, Andrew, let me take you up on a point you were making a second ago. The government looks to the scientists for some kind of consensus here on the scientific data that's available. Problem is, there isn't enough available, is there? Therefore, no consensus.
No, that is the basic problem, Alex. You're quite right. There is not enough basic data about the effects of GM crops on humans, on animals, and on the environment. Now, it seems now that doubt, that worry existed way back in the early 90s at the Food and Drug Administration in the States when these things were first approved. We now know from documents that came up in a court case in the States, and then they've now been posted on a website. Maybe we could give that address of that website on Channel 4 News after this programme. We now know that senior people in the FDA were extremely worried about the effects on humans and the environment. They made their worries known. What happened was that the White House came back and smothered those doubts. They silenced the critics, effectively. That's what we see from the documents. Now, there is a smell, I think, of a cover-up here.
Andrew Veach in Edinburgh, thanks very much indeed. Now, a quick look at some of the day's other news. The Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams has told his party's conference in Dublin that the Good Friday Agreement appears to be in tatters. He said that a solution could be months or even years away and called on Northern Irish nationalists to return to the streets to change the government's mind. A 19-year-old man has appeared before magistrates in Northern Ireland charged with murdering 2 teenagers. Andrew Robb and David McIlwain were found stabbed to death in a lane near Tandragee in County Armagh 8 days ago. Magistrates remanded Stephen Leslie Revels, who's from Tandragee, in custody. Iceland's most active volcano has erupted in spectacular fashion for the first time in 10 years. Mount Hekla sent a huge plume of smoke and ash up 4 miles into the sky. Flights have been redirected to avoid the area around the volcano, but because it's virtually unpopulated, experts say there is no immediate danger. In this afternoon's big football fixture, the Worthington Cup final, First Division Tranmere Rovers were hoping for a slice of